In this video, you're going to learn how to build a rentals management application on Bubble completely without code. We'll walk you through core features that you would expect to find on a system like this. So managing your inventory, creating a customer-facing order flow, and also a business dashboard of sorts so that you can gather important insights about how your rentals are doing. Now, whether you're building this for a single rentals business, or maybe you're building a SaaS platform for rental businesses, all of these walkthroughs are going to take you through everything you need to know about data structure and design and all of the workflow logic. So we're going to jump into an overview of our demo application first so you have some context, and then we'll take a look at the details. Let's jump in. I'm on the customer facing side first here. So I have sort of a landing page where I can see what's available for rent. And I'm going to click on this book now button to begin the booking process so I can get started here. So we're taken to a separate page, and you can see that this is going to be a multi-step process. We've got this designed to let the user know where they're at in the flow. If they want to cancel the booking and just back out of it, this button will take them back. But the first thing that we're going to select here is when we want to do our rental. And this is important to do first because that's going to dictate what equipment is available for that time period. So I'm going to choose a couple days from now, and we'll do a morning slot, and I'm going to say I want to rent for 4 hours. Okay, so I'll hit continue here, and you see now I have a rental summary getting started on the right hand side, and I have access to all the different equipment available, and I can start to indicate quantities here. So if I want to do a single kayak, you can see it's multiplying that quantity times the per hour pricing times the amount of hours that I want to rent for. If I do, I want to show you here, if I do, a really high number on a particular equipment that, where there's not enough for either this time period or just in general with the inventory, if they just don't have that many in stock, we have some conditional designs here to let the user know that way they can't move forward with that amount. So I'm going to choose one there. Let's do maybe 3, or let's do 4 dry bags here. So as I modify everything, you can see that these are highlighted to let me know what I've selected, and everything's getting calculated in real time to let me know what my totals are going to look like. I also have some business logic in here that's really just a choice for this demonstration, where if the order is over $100, then we're going to require a 20% deposit to be paid immediately so that they can, complete their booking, and then the rest can be paid at the time of the rental. Again, that's completely just a demonstration here, but trying to put in a little bit of everything so you can see where the different components are for payments, for calculations, for selections, things like that. All right, so I'm going to move on to the next step here, and here I can fill in all my contact info. I've got some basic fields. Obviously, you can add in whatever you need to collect from your users. So I'm going to say Joey Tribbiani, and Joey at Sample is the email. We'll put in some phone number here. Okay, so we'll hit continue. So that's going to create a customer behind the scenes. It'll tie it to the booking, and we'll take a look at all of the data structures and how that works a little later in this video here. So now the screen that I'm on is a series of documents or paperwork that we want the customer to sign before they can complete their booking. So this is something that can very much be done a lot of different ways. If you're going to have integrations with e-signature services, you could absolutely do that. I have basically 5 standard documents that we're going to present to everybody, and what I'm doing is when I click on this button here, I'm showing a pop-up to display the terms, what the agreement is. There's some dynamic information being populated based on their previous selections, like the date, the equipment, the calculated total, and I have a little signature area here. So let's say Joey signs with his initials, Joey Tribbiani. We're going to save that, and that'll create a PDF that will then be saved to the booking record behind the scenes so that we can always access it. So now this says complete. If I click on this, I can actually see that generated PDF with my signature there. Okay. Now, at the moment, I have this unlocked where I can proceed without going through all the documents, but obviously you can have logic to restrict the user from moving forward until they've completed all the steps here. So I'm going to click on continue. So now we're looking at sort of final payment terms, equipment summary, to let the user know, all right, this is what you're going to do next. This is why, details about refunds, things like that. So again, because my order is over $100, that's just the logic I've put in here, I'm going to require a 20% deposit. So I'm going to click on continue. And this is going to take me to a Stripe hosted checkout page. So we've got an integration with Stripe here to collect the payment. So it's pulled in my email address for that customer I entered in. I'm going to put in a test card here. Okay, pay. And this will take me back to, it'll process that payment and it'll take me back to the screen that I was just on. So a couple of things are running behind the scenes, and now we've moved on to the next step automatically, which is just to say, okay, you're good to go. We've got a confirmation number. We've also sent an email to the user so they have that for their records. And that completes the whole booking flow for them. So clicking on this button is just going to take me back to the index page. Now, from the admin's perspective, we're on a separate page here. We're logged in as an admin. You can see here the email address. And I've got several different views that I can get to. So this is sort of functioning like a single page app here for this page only, since the admin has many different things that they can do. So our dashboard view is going to give them some high level stats about their sales, the refunds, customers, things like that. We also have a calendar to display the rentals that have been at least booked. Now we've got some color coding happening here to let us know which ones have yet to happen. So the ones in blue, those are in the future. The red means that it's been canceled. If I go back to the previous week, we have one in green here to say that this is one that has been completed. Okay, so from here, the admin can click on a booking. So I'm going to click on Joey at Sample. This is the one that I just created. And it's going to take me to this detail page where I have access to every single component of the booking order, right? So we have the customer information. I can modify the customer details. I can apply a credit to the customer. Let's say we want to credit Joey $50. So that gets added to, Joey's customer profile. Here I have the line items that Joey selected for this particular rental. I can modify them if I want. So if I wanted to, add one more dry bag, let's say 5, it updates it to 25, and that kind of has a ripple effect here for the rental total. Okay, down below we have the details for the date. Again, I can modify these. I can modify the duration. Everything's going to calculate as I make adjustments. When it's time for Joey to start the rental, we can run a charge on, for the remaining balance. We can present a screen, or if they're going to pay in cash, we can have things in here to log that for our records. Lots of different ways for you to track all of the payments. But the idea here is that this is sort of the main detail page for that rental. So any information you want to save is just going to depend on how you structure your database, what fields you're going to create there and how you're going to organize that. And again, we are going to look at how we've organized our data structure for all of this. So here we also have a list of transactions that's keeping track for this particular rental here. Let's say that I did want to apply that credit that I gave Joey to this rental. I'll click on this button. So that's sort of another transaction that's added. It's reduced the total amount due still here. Let's say that Joey has gone ahead and made his payment. I'm going to click on this button here. We have a little bit of a shortcut for this demo, but it would otherwise show a payment screen for Joey to fill out, or again, if we're accepting cash or something like that. But ultimately, we have another item logged here in the transactions. The balance due is now 0. And we have full information about how this order was processed. And we also can see that one document that Joey signed. Again, if I hit open here, it'll show me that same PDF. Okay, the rental status is currently active. I can either cancel it or mark it as complete. That would help us with the color coding in the calendar, and overall just filtering, what rentals we have yet to process in a given day or week. If I go over to the rentals view, this is just a simple table of those rentals in this format, right? So if we wanted to see it sort of in a list rather than in a calendar, I can filter by the statuses of the rentals, and clicking on the view button just takes me to that same detail page. If I go to transactions, another similar table just to see things in a list format here, this will take me to the same booking page. I can filter on the statuses. We also have an equipment table to just give an overview of equipment. Now, in this demonstration, I'm not going to go into the management of equipment or getting too detailed with these other tables. I do encourage you to take a look at our other walkthrough on inventory applications, because that goes much deeper into tracking stock of items, and that can be combined. Those functionalities can be combined in an app like this if you want a total business solution for a rentals company of any category. So what we're going to be focused on the most here is the booking flow from the customer's perspective and managing the rental details from the admin's perspective so that they can edit the numbers. We have all the right relationships and calculations in place. All right, so now that you have some context over the features we'll focus on, we're going to begin by looking at the data structure. We always start here no matter what type of app we're building because it has such a huge influence on how everything else comes together in your app. So we're going to go into the editor and take a look at the data types, fields, and option sets. Okay, so we're in the data tab of our editor here. So I'm just going to start at the top of the list. This is our customer data type. Whenever the customer goes through that booking flow, they enter in their contact details. We're going to create a customer record for them and basically set up a profile for them. So if they ever come back to rent from the company again, you can just add on to that same profile. So this customer has general contact information, email, name, phone number, things like that. And we also have two relationship fields here. One to all of the orders that the customer has placed with this company. So this is a list of rental orders. This is another data type that's unique to an individual order. And then we also have a relationship to a list of transactions, but specifically this list is only going to be for credit transactions, not deposits, not refunds or general order payments. Those transactions will be created, but we're not really creating a relationship here because those are going to be tied to the orders anyway. This is really more to create a credit on the customer profile as a whole. So, maybe there is an offer that they're taking advantage of, or the company is just going to credit the customer in general so that they can use that credit for any future order that they place. So that way we keep it separate from a specific order until the company is ready to apply it. Okay, so this is more of a shortcut field to help us with some of that logic. The next data type is the equipment. So this is basically how we manage all of the details for the items that are up for rent. So here we have 4 items in the database right now. Let me go over to the equipment table so you can see my 4 records, all of the information, the description, the name, the photo, the price. I also have a yes or no field here to determine whether the equipment is a flat fee price or not. So this dry bag would be an example of a flat fee where it's not going to be multiplied by the number of hours it's being used. It's just $5 per order and that's it. And then all of these other ones are going to be priced based off of the hour. Okay, we also have a number field here to keep track of the stock for every item. Again, if this is something that you want to build out in more detail, I do recommend you take a look at our inventory app walkthrough where we do a lot more with stock management. Okay, but this is just going to give us a number so that we can have some logic in there to check against availability. We do have our built-in user data type. Every Bubble app comes with this. We're actually not using this very much for the features that I walked you through. Of course, you will use it in general for any application because this is how you create user logins. You may want to have more of a collaborative environment for the company side where employees can log in and you can keep track of who's doing what. So you can have names and photos here for your users. But this is your data type for creating logins into the system. Okay, now these next 3 data types are very closely related, and that's why I named them this way. I put this little emoji in front so that Bubble can group them together. But this is all related to a rental order. And actually, I'll start with this data type here. So the rental order is sort of the parent record that manages all of the general information about a single order, whereas the line item is going to be about each individual equipment that the customer wants to book. So I'm going to start this process here real quick so you can see what I mean. So the date and the time and the number of hours that they want to book, that's one piece of detail that's going to be saved to the order. And then here, as I make selections for individual equipment, that's going to create a separate line item because each item is going to have its own piece of information in terms of quantity. So, 2 kayaks, and there's a very specific subtotal for that one thing, and then another line item for this one kayak, right, its own subtotal calculation. So those line items need to be split out into their own sort of sub-record or child record of the parent order. That way we can add up all of the subtotaled items and then we have a grand total for the order as a whole, okay? We have separately a transaction data type to just keep good documentation over anything payment related. Like I showed you earlier, we do have an integration with Stripe, so here we can save the Stripe IDs. We can keep track of whether things have been refunded or not. It's going to help us with just documentation. If we want to print out documentation for the customer on all the payments that they've made. This keeps things really, really easy, especially because a single order can have multiple transactions tied to it. Okay, so I'm going to dig into these data types in a little bit more detail here. So the first field here under the rental order is a calendar color. This is a text field. This is really more of a shortcut field to help us with the color coding on that calendar based off of the status. This is actually going to be related to one of our option sets, so I'll come back to this in a moment here. We have a cancellation date if the order was canceled, so not every order is going to have a value here. We have a field called current step, which is to help keep track of the order in the booking flow. So as soon as the user starts this booking process, we already have an order record in the system. And as they move through each of the steps, we start filling out more and more of these fields here. And this field is just to help us keep track of the step that they're on. So if they refresh the page, they leave and come back, the application can help remember where they are. Okay, then we have a relationship to all of the line items. Again, these are kind of like the child records for every individual equipment that gets added to the order. We have a relationship to the customer, so we know who is placing the order. The rental duration, this is going to be in terms of hours. It's just going to help us with our math and displaying start and end times. We also have separate date fields for the start and end. This gives us a bit of flexibility to have these three details here. We have a relationship to all of the signed documents as a list field here, so that we have easy access to that paperwork without having to search the entire table. You'll notice that I am using lists in a few different places here, and not only does it help you kind of get shortcut access to those details, but it actually can help with performance in your logic because you're reducing searches. Searches can be one of your more expensive operations in terms of workload consumption. So if we can take advantage of a list, we'll do that. Now, keep in mind, a list is not always the best idea. You certainly don't want to have a record where the list can be hundreds and thousands of items because that really increases the size of the record overall, and that can affect you negatively in different ways. But if you think about one single order, there's only going to be so many line items for one order. Even if it's a big party that's coming through and renting equipment, we're not talking about dozens and dozens of items here. Same thing for the documents, especially if we know that every customer is going to sign the same 5 documents, then we know that at most this will be a list of 5 items here. And then same thing for the transactions. There's not going to be too many for a single order. We do have a relationship to one of our option sets here called status. So an order can be in any one of these 4 statuses. This is a list of choices that I created within the option set area. We'll jump over there in just a moment. But you have complete control over the different phases an order can move through. And then I have that kind of grand total amount, so we always know what the total amount paid for the order was, regardless of what has partially been paid, what's been refunded, or what the balance due is. This is our final number so that we always know where we're at. Okay, so then jumping over to the rental line item, this is much smaller. Again, this is just per equipment being added to a specific order. We have the quantity that the user selected. We have the equipment that they selected. So let's say, 2 kayaks, single kayaks, and there'll be a relationship to the parent order, and then we'll have a calculated subtotal. So that's going to be the quantity times the price of the selected equipment. Notice that I don't actually need to have that base price here. It already lives within the equipment record. So as long as I have this relationship, that's all I need. I will be able to get access to the equipment's price in my logic. Then we have our transaction data type. Again, this is just to keep track of all payment details. So we have the actual amount involved. If the transaction is a credit, so here's another option set with my choices for types of transactions. So if the transaction is a credit for the customer, then we'll have a way to see if this credit has been used or not. Again, this is just to help display to the admin how much credit there is available. It's also going to help in the logic to know how much credit to apply to an order. Okay, then we have an ID field, which is just a text. This is so that we can save the Stripe ID generated for payments and for refunds. Having the ID is good for documentation purposes, but you need an ID in order to process a refund, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to identify the transaction for Stripe. And then similar to whether or not the credit transaction was used, we also have a yes or no field to know whether the payment was refunded or not. We have a relationship between the transaction and the customer, as well as the order that the transaction was for. And then, like I showed you earlier, we have the option set for the type. Okay. Let's move into these final two data types that are also related. Again, I have this little emoji here to keep them together. We have document source, which is just a way for the admin to get the documents they want into the system. I have a text field for content, and then I have a document type. Okay, and then moving over to the document signed data type, this is for whenever the customer has signed a document, we have a separate entry in the database for it. So that way we know which order it's for, what type of document it is, and then this is where we would save that newly generated PDF with the customer's signature. So those are our data types and all the fields within. Now I'm going to move over to the option set. We have three of them. So these are basically, lists of choices that we're hard coding into the system, but we're taking advantage of this capability that Bubble has so that we have a lot easier access to those choices. We're very consistent with how we display the choices. And because option sets are technically not a part of the database, you're actually getting some performance benefits from it as well, because we're not asking Bubble to search for anything. So the document type choices, you can see here, agreement, waiver, these are just kind of sample documents that we want to show. We have the order status, so our four different choices here. And I've also added a custom attribute to go alongside the display field here called calendar color. So every status is going to have a specific color. For example, active is a green here, canceled is going to be a red color. This is the hex code for it. And whenever the status changes, what we're doing in the logic is we're copying that color over to the orders calendar color field. That way we can reference it in the design. And when we look at the design, I'll show you where those things are inserted in the expressions. Transaction type, again, just kind of a sample set of things that we're using for the features in our demo. Transaction can be a deposit, a payment, a refund, or a credit to the customer profile overall, or a credit that has been applied to a specific order, right, to take down the amount that is due. All right, and there you have it. There is our data structure. Hey, real quick, if you're finding this helpful, take a look at our free extended workshop over at coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop, where we'll guide you through our four-phased approach for going from idea to app. So if you're looking for a complete start to finish guide, you're going to love this workshop. The link is on the screen right now and in the description below. All right, so now that you have your data structure organized, we're going to move into design. This is an application that has a customer-facing sequence, right? They're going through a series of questions and prompts, selections to complete their rental order. It's really important that the design is easy to understand. The last thing you want is for a potential customer to abandon the process because they got confused because things just weren't designed very well. So we're going to go back into the editor, into the design canvas to take a look at how we've organized all of our visual components. Let's jump in. All right, first thing we're going to look at is the page structure of the booking page. This is the customer-facing side where they move through all the steps to put together their rental order. So the first element I have on this screen is this container, this group called group main. If you followed any of our other walkthroughs, you'll see that I typically add a primary container like this with this name here because it gives me a lot of flexibility over the margins at the page level. And basically everything else designed on the screen is going to be within this group here. Okay, so I have my page title, I have a group for the cancel button and a note for the users, and then I have three inner groups for really the rest of the design here. So group progress is going to hold these text elements to help the user understand where they're at in the flow. Then I have group center, which currently we're not seeing anything inside of it, but this is where all the different steps will display. So if I open this up here real quick, you're going to see I have 6 steps. They're all hidden by default. So I'm going to go over what our custom state system is to help us navigate between these steps. And then I also have a group summary that will be displayed for most of the steps on the right-hand side. Below that group center, I have my bottom navigation. So I've got my back and continue buttons. I also have a conditionally visible button here to go to the deposit payment. This goes to the Stripe checkout page. And all of these have conditions, based on what step we're on because I don't always need to see all of the buttons all at once. Okay, so let's look at the custom state system that controls which center group is visible at any given time. My group main, I'm going to open up the property editor here. I have a custom state on this element. So the state is called step. This is a number, and by default, we start with number 1. So the value of this state will dictate which of these inner groups is going to be visible. So if I take a look at step 1 here, okay, this is, remember, where we define the rental date and time, and also how many hours is the first thing they choose. By default, this group is hidden. You see here, the element is visible on page load. We have that turned off. So on page load, it is not visible. The condition is going to say when it becomes visible. And in this case, it's when that group main's step, right? This is the custom state on that element is, and then I've just typed in the number 1 here. So each of these groups is going to have a similar condition, but it's going to respond to a different custom state value. So I'm going to hide step 1 and step 2. So this is where they choose their equipment that they want to add to their order. You see here the condition is now this is visible when it's step 2. So 3 is going to have 3, 4 will have 4, and so on. So only one of these groups will ever be visible at any given time. Now, there are a few other elements around these center groups that are also going to work off of the custom state for just interactivity purposes, just appearance properties, making sure that things are intuitive for the user. So for example, the text up above for the progress, if we look at the number 1 here, you notice that by default, the design is such that it's like a gray color. And when the custom state step is greater than or equal to 1, then we're going to change the color to green. Same thing for all of the other ones, including the label right next to it. So only if it's greater than or equal to 2, then we change it to green here. So this shows the user, I'm going to kind of move across a couple steps here. This shows the user what they've completed. As they move forward. So if I'm on step 2, that means that I've already completed 1, and I'm currently on 2. If I move on to the next step here, right now 1 through 3 are all colored. So just a little bit of orientation help, some visual cues for the user there. We also have conditions on our navigation buttons. So if I'm currently on step 1, I don't need to see the back button because there's nothing to go back to. Step 1 is the first step. So we're going to hide that button in that case. For the deposit button, we have a little bit more here for the condition because, as I described earlier, we have sort of business logic decision where, if the order overall is greater than or equal to $100, then we're going to require that deposit. So only if we're on step 5, which is that summary for the deposit, and the total amount that has been calculated is at least $100, then we're going to show this here. Otherwise, they're going to skip the deposit step and just go straight to confirmation. So you'll see that my continue button actually has several conditions to change the various states that it can be. So it'll either say confirm or it'll be hidden if we're near the end. Step 6 is the very last step where it shows, you're booked and here's your confirmation number. We don't need to show a continue button there anymore, so we hide it as well. Right now, what actually changes the value of that custom state? Well, that's going to happen in the workflows, and there's actually several different trigger points to update that number. I am going to go through that one workflow right now, again, just to give you some overall context so you're oriented here within the navigation. So if I click on the continue button, let's go to the workflow here for that. Notice that I actually have several different versions of workflows for this one button click. So when the continue button is clicked and only when the step is 1, we're going to do this series of actions, versus when the button is clicked and only when the step is currently 2, then we're going to do these actions. So depending on the step, there might be other activity we need to run, and so that's how I've separated out every button click of the same button, right? It's not like 6 different continue buttons. It's the same button, but we have multiple workflow events with very unique conditions so that only one of these flows ever runs at one time. So for every one of these flows, we are going to run at least this action right here. Okay, this is a set state action. You can find this under the element actions, set state, and this is what changes our state value. So if I'm currently on step 1, this is the condition for the event, then the action is going to change that state's value to 2. And I've just typed in the number here. Okay, so I'll choose my element, I choose my custom state, it's the only one that I have there right now, and then there's the value change. And then instantly, as soon as that value changes, all those conditions kick in or kick off, and change the visibility, properties, and behaviors on the in the front end design. All right, so now I'm going to spend some time looking at the more unique areas of the design, especially the areas that have a lot of conditional logic to help with visual cues for the user. So within these steps here, step 1, pretty straightforward. We've got date and time picker and input to collect the date and duration details. I'm going to move over to step 2 here. We're going to spend a little bit of time with this repeating group. This is going to display all of the equipment options available to us. And once we're on step 2, from step 2 to 5 actually, we're also going to have the summary over here on the right hand side. And if we go over to the condition for this summary group, we can see that this becomes visible when the custom state step is between 2 and 5. So we have a range here. Okay, and this side-by-side layout is happening because the parent container, group center, which is the parent of all of these inner steps, this has a layout setting of rows. So everything inside that's visible just stacks horizontally. We do have some column gap spacing, 20 pixels here, to create a little bit of breathing room between those two items. But that's how we get that layout there. Okay, so let's take a look at this repeating group here of our equipment. Okay, so we're on this step where the user is choosing what they want to add to their order. So the type of content is equipment. The data source is a search for equipment, and I'm choosing to show everything in my equipment table. This is a great place to add any constraints to filter out anything you don't want to include. So for example, let's say you have an active or inactive field on the equipment data type. You can add a constraint to remove anything that is considered inactive. You can also add sorting here as well. Inside of the repeating group cell, I have this inner group, which has this white background, some roundness. This is giving me that sort of card-like design. I'm not displaying a repeating group separator. I'm just allowing the sort of the negative space between these groups, these white groups, create that separation there. And this group is just going to continue referencing the cell's equipment, right? Every cell represents one equipment record. And now I can do things inside of that group to display details about that record, such as the photo, the name of the equipment, the calculated subtotal, quantity, all of that. Now, I actually have a separate data source that is being referenced here within the equipment cell. And that separate data source is going to be a specific rental line item. Okay, that line item is unique to the order, the overall order that we're building here on this page, and this cell's equipment. If we go back to the data structure, remember the line item here, this is sort of the intersection of an equipment record and an order, so that I can say I want this many of this equipment for this particular order, and we can have a separate calculated subtotal for that item. Okay, now a little later in this video, we'll go through the workflows on how to create those records and update those details to the particular fields. But in terms of design, the cell is referencing the equipment. And I have this group right here, which holds my quantity input, referencing the line item for this equipment record for the order. And so to find that line item, first of all, type of content here is rental line item. And the data source is going to be the page's rental order. Go to that order's list of line items, filter that list down by the equipment, right? Because the order could have other line items for different equipment. So we're going to filter it down by this equipment and then go to the first one. So there's either going to be one record that matches that exact filter, or there are going to be no line items if the user is going through this for the very first time, right? The record doesn't exist yet. So this group may or may not have a data source. It either finds the line item or it doesn't. If it does, then we'll be able to do things like, display the quantity of the line item. If the user leaves and comes back, we're trying to help pre-populate and kind of help them pick up where they left off as much as possible. So we do have an initial content in here. So this group, which is giving me a shortcut, is going to help me with a couple other areas in this cell design. First, it's going to give me a shortcut to the subtotal. This text right here is going to reference that group. Okay, so reveal the element, right, that shows me that group. And I'm going to go to that line item's subtotal field, which is just a number. That way I can display the number as a currency. If the line item doesn't exist, then the subtotal will simply be empty. There's nothing to format. And what I'm going to do is tell Bubble to fall back to a different value, or in other words, default to. This is an operation here that you can do on a text. Default to, and I've just typed in the currency symbol 0.00. Not only am I referencing that line item within the initial content for the quantity, but I'm also referencing it for the subtotal, and I'm also referencing it in the conditions of the parent group here, this white card group, in the conditions to change the coloring. Okay, so whenever I have something selected, I'm going to change the color to help highlight that item for the user. Or if I run into a conflict with the quantity, so let's say I put 10 items here, like that, then it's going to change it to red. So these are the two conditions that dictate those color changes. The first one is if the group line item, again, going back to that group here, if that group's line item is not empty, we'll change the colors, the borders, the border width, things like that. Or we'll change it to red if we have this text that displays. So we have a hidden text right now here, and if this is visible, then we know that we're going to change everything to red. So the actual logic for understanding whether the quantity really is not available is going to happen on the text. So if the condition passes, we make the text visible. That has sort of a ripple effect on the condition at the card level to just change the coloring. That way I don't have to build out that entire condition multiple times. If I know that this text is visible, then I know that the text has passed this condition here. This expression is a little bit complex. I'm going to walk you through it piece by piece so you can see the logic that we came up with for determining whether there's a conflict or not. Now, this is satisfying our needs here. You may need to have other factors incorporated to check for conflict, so just be mindful of that, okay? So what I need to do is I need to search for any existing orders that may be happening at the same time as the order that I'm currently building, and add up the number of items for this equipment that are already going to be taken. And if I add that to the quantity that I want, I need to make sure that there is still enough according to the stock for that item, right? So if 5 kayaks are already being used for the same time period that I want to rent, and I want to rent another 5, we need to make sure that there's at least 10 kayaks available at that time, by the company. So we're not just checking for conflicts for the time period, but actually also for the quantity that is available. So we're going to search for rental orders that are currently active for the current date of the order that we're building. Okay, so we're not yet filtering down to the time period. We're just narrowing things down to the date. This is going to knock out a lot of orders so that less data is sent back to the browser. It's more of a performance thing here. So we're filtering out as much as we can, stuff that we know we don't need to look at, because we're about to perform a few more filters, and we want to do that on as small a list as possible for performance. So once we've identified active orders for today, we're going to then filter those orders further with these 2 advanced constraints. Okay, so when you add a constraint, you can type in advanced, and that will give you basically a composer that lets you create more complex expressions. So both of these have to be true in order for an order to stay in the results list here. Okay, so the first one is that we're only interested in orders whose line items equipment actually contains the equipment that we're concerned with here, just for this cell. Because there could be other active orders at the same time, but do not involve the same equipment that we want. We don't care about those. They're not going to create a conflict with the quantity that we're looking for here. So we're searching for active orders that contain the equipment that we're looking at, and now we're looking at more specifically for the time period. So that's what this expression is doing here. I'm looking at this rental order, that's the order in question just from the search results. It's going to evaluate this for every order coming back from this search. This order's start to end. Okay, so I'm creating a range here. Rental start, that's a date, range, and then this order's rental end. And if that range overlaps with, okay, this is a range operator, overlaps with the current page's order, this is the order that I'm building, and that order's range, then we know there's going to be a time conflict. Okay, range overlapping with another range. All right, so if we return any orders after the search and the filter, then we know that there is going to be a conflict, at least in terms of there are other people renting the same item at the same time. So now we need to count up, because maybe the business, right, the rental company has enough to go around at the same time. So I'm going to go to the line items for those orders, okay, the list of line items, and filter it down by the equipment, okay, because the quantity for the equipment lives within the line item record, not within the order. The line item is unique to the equipment. So once I've identified the right orders, I'll go to the list of line items, filter it down by the equipment, go to the quantity field for the equipment, and add up that quantity, right? There could be 2 other orders at the exact same time that are working with the same equipment. So I'm going to take all of their quantities and add them up for this item. And I'm going to add that to the quantity that I'm looking for. So you can see a plus input quantities value. And if that number, right, the number already booked plus the number that I want, if that number is greater than the stock available for this equipment, then we're going to make this text visible. It's going to say quantity not available. There is not enough to go around to satisfy the already booked items plus the number that we want here. Okay, and if the quantity is not available, that's when the coloring changes to red, where we have a workflow behind the scenes here when the quantity is changed to that value that is going to delete the line item. It'll basically prevent us from including it in the order. Okay, so I know that was a bit of a maze to go through, and again, you may have other factors that need to be incorporated here. Your data structure may be slightly different, but this is the kind of thing that we're looking at to create this sort of smart logic to help the user only book what is available. It helps the admins, right? You kind of automate things more. All right, so that is our step 2 with our repeating group. I'm going to collapse this down. Step 3 here, really straightforward, just a series of inputs to collect customer information. We'll look at the workflows a little bit later in the video so you can see how you create a customer and tie it to the record. Step 4, let's open this up here. This is where we're going to manage our documents, and this is actually going to involve our pop-up that we have here. So this is a repeating group of all of our document sources. So this is managed by the admin. So you can add constraints here if you need, if you want to make things a little bit more dynamic so that, based on the equipment that's added to the order, it only offers certain documents. Maybe not all documents need to be signed based on what they're renting. This would be where you add those constraints, okay? Inside of this cell, I'm displaying the name of the document, the type of document. So it's the rental agreement or it's the medical waiver, things like that. And then I have a button that's going to open up my pop-up. I have a condition on the button to change the styling of it so that it says complete. If we can see that there is a signed document for this document type already, right? It changes the colors here. So, if the orders signed documents type contains the cells type, then we know that they've already signed it, and it will do something different in the workflow. It'll actually open it up to display it. Okay, and now, so the pop-up here is can be used for all of our documents. Now, this is definitely an area that can go many different ways depending on the type of integrations you have and how involved you want your waiver system or terms system to be. Okay, so what I have is this pop-up is going to reference a specific document source, right? So every time they click on view, we're just looking at that one type of document. And defining the data source at the pop-up level is going to happen in the workflow. That way inside we can display the source's type again, and we can also display the source's content. Okay, now I want to show you how I've implemented this for one approach. Okay, I cannot stress enough that this is just one way of doing this. Let's go into my document source, and I'm going to open up the rental agreement here. So if we take a look at the content, the entire agreement is here, and then there are some areas that are placeholders. So you can see here, the company agrees to rent the following equipment to the renter, and then I have equip in all caps with brackets. Then we have rental period from start to end, down here, end, and then return time. We have amount. So these placeholders, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find and replace them with the actual values for the order that's getting built out. So for every individual placeholder, I'm doing a find and replace operation to find that placeholder variable, and then I'm going to replace it with the dynamic value that's coming from the order. So the equipment in this case is going to come from the order, right? The pages order, list of line items, and then each of those line items, equipment name. So I just have a comma separated list of the equipment that the user selected. Here I have another find and replace for the start, so it goes to that start date, formatting, right? And so I just stack all of the variables in a separate find and replace operation. Now I have a signature pad below this text here so that it's all in one place for the user to sign, and this is actually using a plugin. So the plugin we're using here is called Signature Pad. BA Studios, it's a free plugin. All of the plugins that we're using here for this demonstration are all free. This design here, once they click on save, it's also going to trigger workflows from another plugin that we have here called PDF and Screenshot Pro. We'll come back to this when we look at the workflows a little bit later in the video, but this is what creates the PDF file. Okay, so you can stylize different aspects of the signature pad, but this is kind of all in one from that plugin. All right, so there's our documents there. And then over in step 5, let's close up step 4, step 5 here. This is just kind of a final summary. We're going to display the equipment list and also any final notes or terms to let the user know about. And then finally, we have our step 6, which is just the, congratulations, you're booked. Just let them know that they got an email, show the ID, and then a button so that they can leave the page. Okay. Now, the last piece that I want to go over here is within the summary. So let me close all of this up here so you can see this, so that we can do a little bit of math for the user in terms of what to expect for what's due today and what's due at the rental start. So I do have a hidden group here for due today. So for the date and time, this is just coming directly from the rental order. Same thing for the duration. Same thing for the total amount. We do have that default to, that text there so that there's a fallback value. Okay, now for the due at rental start and due today, let's actually start with the due today. This entire group is only going to be visible if the total amount due is greater than or equal to $100. That's just the business logic that we wanted to put in for this demo, okay? And so now we have to calculate that deposit amount. And I'm using another plugin to help me with that math. And this is just a good plugin to know in general when you're working with math formulas. Okay, the plugin I'm using here is Toolbox. This is sort of a collection of utilities, and I'm only using this element here called expression. Okay, so this is going to let me do some math formulas with a more of a multi-line composer. It also honors order of operations. I can type in parentheses. It'll respect that and give me math right with, honoring the order of operations there so I get the right numbers. So I'm going to take the rental orders total amount times 0.2 because I want to find 20% of the total amount, and I'm going to round it to 2 decimal places. I want to make sure that this outputs a number. Okay, so this expression will hold a value for me that I can reference in other areas. So this text here is just going to display that value, with this currency formatting. So whatever that calculated will display it as a price there. And then whatever's due at the rental start is either going to be the total amount if we're under $100, or if we are over $100, then we're going to display the total minus the calculated deposit. Okay, so right now I have an order that is $400. So it's doing this calculation. It's calculating that $80 is 20% of 400, and then 400 minus 80 is going to give us 320. If I go back, let me refresh the page here. If I go back and update my order so that I don't need to pay a deposit, so we're going to take down most of these here. Let's get rid of this and this. Okay, so we just have our one kayak for 1 hour, or sorry, for 3 hours, which still keeps us under the $100 threshold. So I don't have anything due today. And this is just going to default to the total amount. And actually, if I go over to the very end, my step 5, notice that I don't have that deposit payment button. So we have other conditions to hide that. And we also have conditions on the text here. So, the very next thing that happens right now is I just confirm. I'm not taken to the payment page. All right, so those are the bigger pieces of logic that we have here within the design of the booking page. Now we're going to look at the design for the admin side of things. So this is a single page that has 5 possible views. You can see 4 of them here from our menu up at the top, but the 5th one is actually that detail view when we click into a rental from the calendar or from any one of our tables here. We do have these shortcut buttons. So navigating between the different views is all managed by a custom state. So our group main here that we have on our admin page, we have a state called tab. This is just a text, and by default, we're going to start with the value of dashboard. That way our dashboard group shows first. So here's my group main in the elements tree. I'm going to open this up, and here are the 5 inner groups, right? Our 5 possible views, and they're all hidden by default. Okay, so here's our example for group dashboard. The visibility is turned off on page load, and it is the condition that makes it visible based on the value of the custom state. Okay, so group mains tab is dashboard. I just typed in that word there. When that's the value, then this group is visible, versus for the rental details group, right? So if I open this up, this is my big form with all the information there. This one will be visible if the tab's value is details. So there are several different trigger points throughout this page. The primary one is really at the top, and these buttons are what are responsible for changing that state value. So if I wanted to go to the transactions view, we'll see here when we click on this button, we're going to set the state of group mains tab to the word transactions, and that'll affect all the conditions to show us the right thing. Okay, so let's actually start with the dashboard to take a look at how this calendar was put together here. This is coming from a plugin, the free plugin that we've installed into the app. This one here called Full Calendar. This is a Bubble published plugin. Very straightforward in terms of what it gives you. We have the primary calendar element, and then we have two different workflow events that you can trigger based on some interactions with the calendar. So the main thing here is you can sort of think of the calendar as a stylized, a special type of repeating group. You do have to provide it with a list data source so that it knows which records in the system to populate the calendar with. So similar to a repeating group, we're going to have a type definition. In this case, we want to see all of our rental orders. And then the actual source, right? So which rental orders is going to be defined by this search. So I'm searching for rental orders, and I've constrained it so that I'm only looking at orders that have at least been confirmed. Okay, maybe they were canceled, maybe they were completed, but I want anything that is not a draft, right? Because I could have many customers on the front end going through bookings, maybe abandoning them. I don't want to see those on my calendar. Right. Now, a couple of other settings here within this, I can define the start and end. That's what helps us show, right, the block so that it spans the right amount of time here in the actual calendar. So those are my two date fields in my rental order data type. You'll notice that it's only going to offer me date fields here. Okay, the event caption, I'm just going to use the customer's email address. That's going to make it easy for the admin to identify if they're looking quickly. Of course, you can change it to any text identifier there. You have a lot of different settings for colors, of course, how you want the week to start. This calendar does come with different views. I went with the week view. I felt like that was most appropriate for a company like this. Okay, so this is how we get that visual interface. It's primarily coming from the plugin. Now, if you have a much more involved calendar system where you need to get more interactive with it, there are other plugins out there, some free, some paid. You can also create your own custom calendar using a repeating group. It takes a little bit more crafting, but it's absolutely possible. Then up above the calendar, we have a few different stats to display to the admin, right? We're just counting up things, we're summing up, our sales. So these are just separate expressions to make that happen. For example, for customers, we're searching for customers and then counting up the search result. Now you can see that I do have a date constraint here because I've chosen to only show the numbers according to the week that we're looking at in the calendar. So you can see here it says this week's stats. If I go to the next week, our numbers change. Again, this is just a decision here for the demo. You can of course make it so that there isn't a date constraint, or you can have date pickers for the user to more fully customize the range that they want to see their stats for. You can definitely create a more elaborate reporting system if you'd like. So here to create the week range, I'm going to constrain on the creation date of the customers because my stat here is, how many new customers were created in this week. So I'm going to take the calendar's current date range, which is a built-in state that the calendar comes with. I'm going to go to the start of that range, and then on the other end of the constraint here, we're going to go to the end. So anything that's inside of this start and end, that's a customer that I want to count up. Moving over to the sales text here, I'm going to search for my transactions and filter it so that I'm only adding up the amounts for actual sales, right? I'm excluding the refunds, I'm excluding credits, and again, for the week range, once I identify those records, I can go to each one of those records amounts, sum them up, and then format it as a currency so the user can see it, right, as an amount. And then I have a default here so that if, in a given week that I'm looking at, there haven't been any sales, we do still see something in this little tile design, so we'll default it to 0.00. So similar with all these other expressions here, it's just a matter of adding in the constraints so that I can identify the records that I want and get that aggregated value or that calculated value at the end of it. So these are my active rental orders. These are my refunded transactions, right? Summing up that amount there. Over here, these are going to be my canceled orders. So this way, the admin and the business overall has a good big picture over how they're doing. All right, so now we're going to look at the details page. So again, if we click on any one of the events from the calendar or from the tables, we're going to run a workflow so that we change our custom state and so that we can pass data over to this group right here. This is my rental details group. So first thing, very important in terms of the data source. type of content of this group is rental order. Now notice that the data source here is empty. We'll actually be defining the data source in the workflow because the data source is going to change. It depends on what the user clicks on in the calendar or from any one of those tables. And I'll actually show you an example here with the calendar click, right? So here is our event. When the calendar A's event is clicked, we're going to set the state to go to the details tab, and we're going to run this action here, display data. This is a data action. Sorry, this is an element action under the group category, display data. And all that is it's defining the data source dynamically through this workflow. So we'll identify the group, right? That's the rental details group. And then the data to display is this calendar's current event. I have access to this calendar because of my trigger, right? This is a trigger that comes with that plugin. It'll detect when a user clicks on one of those events. So now that the group has a data source, everything inside can pull from that data source to populate, all of these different inputs and texts here, okay? So the first thing that I want to just point out is that the way that I've designed this is I've created these different sections, right? Customer, line items, date and total due, and so on. And I've just done it as one giant form that the user kind of scrolls down to get to everything. You can, of course, break this down into sort of sub tabs using another custom state if you want to show just kind of one section at a time, similar to how we're doing the overall groups on this page, right? You can absolutely design it that way. Now, what I'm taking advantage of here is the fact that groups can be mixed and matched to create very specific grid layouts. So either columns or rows, and you can nest them so that you can get exactly the positioning that you want. So for example, here, let's open up our rental details group. I have this first group here called group customer. And you can see that it's highlighting that entire top section with all of the content inside. The layout of this group is going to be set to column. Okay, that means that everything inside of it is going to stack vertically. And we can actually see if I open this up further, right? These are my subgroups labeled to be very clear, what we're looking at, right? This is the name group, email, phone, and credit. But each of those groups are actually defined as rows because everything inside of those groups are going to be stacked horizontally, right? They are creating a row like that. So again, it's up to you to define like your custom grid with whatever combination of containers you want. Now, other parts of this design here, just to call out, you can see that I sort of have this alternating color system that just, I'm just changing the background color of that group. So this one is set to gray. The email doesn't have a background. It's just pulling from the color behind it, which is the parent group there. So that's a nice way to do an alternating if you have a lot of lines to help the user be able to see and consume all that information without getting lost. Down below in the line item section, I have a repeating group because every order is going to have, a dynamic list of line items. So this is another container that's going to pull from the parent groups, rental orders, line items, right? Again, the primary the primary rental details group, that is referencing a rental order. And so everything inside of it can then reference that order to get to other information. So I'm getting that rental order's list of line items. And so inside of that cell, let's open this up here, I have two groups mainly to help me with my layout, specifications. The one on the left here has my two inputs, and then the one on the right has my amount, my subtotal, and then the button here. So this input is going to display the quantity. I can also type into it, of course, and edit it. We'll take a look at the workflows a little later in this video so you can see how things get updated in real time. And same thing for the dropdown. So for the dropdown, the structure is such that you need to provide a list for the data source. So in this case, this is a list of equipment, and the source is going to search for all equipment that we have in the database, right? Again, if you need to constrain it, you can do so there. The caption is just what we see literally here in the wording of the drop-down choices. So I'm just going to go with the equipment name, and then I can provide it with a default to populate with whatever the line item currently has for its equipment. This is just a text, since it's just going to display the calculated subtotal that's happening in the workflows. We're not going to let the admin change that. We're going to have the app do those calculations for the user. Again, there's my remove button to trigger a delete workflow. And then very similar to the customer section above, I have all of my labels and inputs for the totals. Most of these are just text to, again, display those calculated values. Now, our transactions repeating group, this is really a read-only design because this is basically documentation of transactions that have already happened. There's really nothing to edit here. The only thing that the admin can do is refund a payment if they want to give that money back. But you'll notice that This is another dynamic list. Type of content is transaction. The data source is the rental orders, list of transactions. I am sorting it by creation date so that the newest ones are at the top. And then we're just going to use text to display the different details, the type of transaction, the creation date, the Stripe ID. We have the amount that was involved. Here we do have a refund button. Let me actually disable this condition real quick. So this is the default state. The refund button so that they can give back the money on that payment, but depending on the transaction type, this button may not be appropriate. So if this is a transaction that is a payment that has been refunded, okay, so this was that yes or no value on the transaction data type. If it has been refunded, we'll change the label, we'll change the styling a little bit. We'll also not make it clickable because they shouldn't be able to refund it again. In fact, they'll hit an error from Stripe if they try to do that. So if I preview this here, it'll look like that. If the transaction type itself is a refund, there's really nothing to do. So we're actually going to hide the button to make it more clear for the user. Now, if the transaction is a credit to the order here, we're just going to change the labeling so that the wording makes a bit more sense for the type of transaction that is. So from refund to remove. And then our last condition here is just for the hover effect to change the color slightly, give the user a little bit of a visual cue that it is clickable. So I'm going to show you an example here with Joey's rental order. If I scroll down to the bottom, we can see here's a list of transactions. The newest one is at the top, which was a refund on the deposit, right? The deposit here was $60. You can see the button is disabled, but it lets us know very clearly that this is the payment that was refunded, and that matches that separate transaction here. Stripe does create its own ID for a refund that's different from the initial charge. And we're also showing kind of with a negative to, again, make it really clear to the user the overall transaction history. Moving into the documents, this is another repeating group here. This is a list of our signed documents, not the source documents, right? The signed documents are the ones that are unique to this order that have been signed by the user. So again, referencing the rental order to get to that list. So you'll notice with these three repeating groups, documents, transactions, and the line items, the data sources of those three are pointing to our three list fields here within the rental order. Here's the list of line items, documents, and transactions. What that helps us with is eliminate any extra searching of the database that we have to do. These are sort of acting as shortcuts for us. And this is these three fields are really safe in terms of size and performance for the record, because for any one rental order, we're not going to have very many line items. We're not going to have very many transactions or documents. These are very contained, small lists. Down at the bottom of this group, I have some elements to help understand what the status of the rental is. So this text is going to display the current status is displayed. This is from our option set. So it's active, it's canceled, things like that. And depending on the status, we may or may not show the cancel button and the mark as complete, meaning that the rental is done, the customer came to the shop, they went out on the river, they did their thing, they paid, and it's all complete. There's nothing else to do here. Okay, so the cancel button has a condition on it. If the status is not active, there's nothing to cancel, right? So we'll hide the button there. Same thing for the complete. If it's not active, then we can't mark it complete, because not active essentially means that it's either complete or canceled, right? So we're just kind of reversing what the user sees so that they don't accidentally change the status to something that doesn't make sense. So this one that we were just looking at is currently active, so I have the option to do both. I can either cancel or mark it as complete. Let's say we mark it as complete now. Okay, so we have some changes saved there. If I come back to the bottom, you see those two buttons went away and this is updated. In fact, if we go back to our dashboard, we can see that Joey's event has turned green. Now, you can also put in logic, of course, to prevent events that are in the future from being changed to a status that wouldn't make sense, right? It doesn't make sense to mark Joey's event as complete when it hasn't even happened yet. Okay, so now we're gonna real quick just jump into these three different sections here: rentals, transactions, and equipment, just to see how we put the elements together. Again, I mentioned earlier in this video, but if you are interested in doing a more involved inventory management, we have a completely separate walkthrough video on an inventory app by itself. So we have a lot of functionality and features going through that if that's something that you're looking to do. So right now in our, let's close this one down, in our rentals group, we have our table. of rentals, right? So if we wanted to see it in a table format compared to a calendar, very similar in terms of data source. Type of content is rental order. We're searching for it. Now here we're actually giving the user the ability to manually change the status, or to apply a filter essentially. So if I wanted to see all of my completed, then changing that will filter this down. If I can go back to active, now notice that the draft option again is not available here. How did I conceal that from the admin? Let's go over to this drop down. So the type of choice for the drop down is my order option set list, and the source is all of the choices minus draft. I'm going to show you how I put this expression together. Okay, so I'm going to go to all order status, and Bubble is giving me this because the type of choice has already been defined as the order status option set. So I'm going to go to all of them, and then I'm going to say minus item, which is an operation I can do on a list, and then I'll select which one do I want to exclude. Here I'm going to exclude draft, so Bubble's only going to show me the other three options. This way I have more control over how the admin can interact with this table. And every column is going to be a different detail here. These are just texts that are displaying dynamic expressions to pull from that row's rental. All right, now closing down the rentals group, let's go to the transactions since that's sort of the next one in our menu there. Again, very similar structure. We have our data source, the type of content is transaction, searching for transactions and filtered by the transaction type now, right? It's either a deposit or a payment or a refund. So they can isolate which list of items they want to see. Notice we also have a button here. This is just another shortcut to get to the details. It does the same thing as clicking on the event in the calendar. And then over on the equipments table, let's open that up over here. We have an image in this first column, so we're kind of coupling two details together in one column. Same thing for the price. We have the actual amount for the equipment and then that price type. A little bit of formatting here so that we can get a bit of color coding in terms of a flat fee price versus an hourly price. So we're just going off of that flat fee field, which is a yes or no on the equipment record, and formatting it. If it's yes, it'll say per whatever the equipment is, so per dry bag, for example, or no, if it's not, then it's always going to be per hour. This is completely up to you and what your price structures are for your equipment or items that you're renting out. Okay, and then we have the color change if it is a flat fee. The data source for the table here, type of content is equipment, and we're searching for equipment, no constraints, sorting by the name. And this is what we get on the front end of that. Okay, so there are the design components for the admin page. All right, so now it's time to look at the workflow logic. Workflows really make your app much more interactive, whether it's a navigation function or if you're making a payment, you're sending an email, you're modifying your database. This is really where things come to life. So we're going to come back into the editor and take a look at all of the logic that we've put into our features to make them functional. We're going to start with the booking workflows, which actually begins on our index page here when the user first clicks on this Book Now button. So this button here is going to create a rental order. And it's essentially going to be a blank order with not a lot of information saved to it quite yet. We'll default the status to draft, and we'll set the current step to 1 because that's where we want them to begin. And then we're going to navigate them to the booking page, so a separate page where we have all of the multiple steps with the different forms and information that we want to collect from them. Notice that we are passing in the result of step 1 in this data to send field, okay? So in the booking page, the page itself within the property editor, the type of content is set to rental order. So you can think of the page as a giant container acting as a data source. So it's going to reference one single order at a time. So anytime we navigate to this page, we want to make sure that we send over a rental order. So that's what's happening here when we first get started. We create the order so that we have something to send to the page, the result of step 1. Okay, and you'll notice that, I'll do it right here, I'm going to click on the button. When you're on the booking page, you're going to see this unique ID in the URL. That is the unique ID of the new record that was created. Okay, so going over to the booking page, you can see in our workflows here, we've organized everything into folders basically by step just to make it easy to manage. And you'll see there is something that is common between each of these steps, which is our continue button. So step 1, when the continue button is clicked, and only when our custom state is set to 1, then we'll run, whatever actions are relevant for that step. Then step 2, we have another workflow event with that condition when the value is 2. It'll run any relevant actions there. Same thing for 3, 4, and 5, and so on. So we did go over the custom state system earlier in this video, but that's how we're going to navigate between those different sections. We have a cancel button in the upper left corner here, and this is actually going to do a few things because throughout the process, we're creating other records. And so if they're canceling, we want to make sure that we delete all of those records so that you don't have abandoned items taking up your database. So first thing is we're going to delete all of the line items that might have been created throughout this process. Okay, so we'll do a delete list action. This is under data, delete a list of things. The type of things is rental line item, and then the actual list to delete will pull from the rental order right on the page. So remember, the page data source, you always have access to it here because the type of content at the page level is set to rental order. So the current page is rental orders line items. And then what we're going to do for the signed documents, which is the other thing that could be created, we're going to have to run a backend workflow because not only do we want to delete the signed document record, but we also want to delete the file that was generated with the signature. Those files, they're being added to your app's file storage, and you definitely don't want to take up space there because that's limited based on the plan that your app is on. So if you're not using it, you definitely want to get rid of it so you can free up that space. And the reason we're using a backend workflow for this is because there's no action to delete a list of files in one go. We do have a delete a single uploaded file. And so we're going to iterate on that particular action through a backend workflow by telling Bubble to run a workflow on a list. In other words, run it multiple times, once for each file. So in the backend workflows, I have an API workflow here created. Okay, so you'll select General, New API Workflow. And I've just given it this internal name, delete signed doc. Make sure that it's not public. This doesn't need to be exposed outside of your app. And then on the parameter key here, I've just given this an ID of doc signed, and I want to make sure that the type here is to my document, my signed document data type. This is a parameter so that this backend workflow can receive a specific record to work with, okay? And so from the page, when I click on cancel, I'm running this schedule action under custom events, schedule an API workflow on a list. Okay, that's this one right here. So I'm telling Bubble, the type of list is going to be my document signed records. The actual list, like, which specific records I want to run are going to come from my rental order, the list of signed docs. The API workflow I want to run is the only one that I have there right now. That's what I've called it, delete signed doc. I want it to happen right now, current date and time for the scheduled date. And here's the parameter that I created. I'm going to pass in this document signed. So remember, this is going to happen multiple times. If they signed 5 documents, then this is a list of 5, but for each run of this backend workflow, it's going to send in a different reference, right? The first run will reference the first record, the second run will reference the second record, and so on. And so in the backend workflow, we have 2 actions. We're going to do that delete uploaded file, right? Because it can only do it on one file at a time. So now we can reference our parameters file, the parameter being the signed document, and then go to the URL. That tells Bubble to go get that file from the file manager and delete it. And then we'll delete the actual record in the database completely. Okay, so there is deleting those items. Let's come back to our cancel workflow. The last thing we'll do is delete the actual rental order, and then we'll redirect them back to the index so that they can start over if they want. All right, so now we're going to go through the workflows here that are happening within each step. Most of this activity is going off of the continue button. In fact, if I open up the element inspector here, you're going to see all of the different workflow events coming off of this button. So we'll start with step 1 here. This step is addressing the date and time plus the duration that the user wants. So we're going to go to that workflow here that we have in this folder. We have several actions, and I want you to be very mindful of something. This is for every step. If the user is allowed to move back and forth in the sequence, you need to be careful that changes they make to selections they've already made could have a ripple effect. So if the user is in step 3, right, they've already selected the date and time, they've already selected the equipment, which means a lot of stuff is already calculated in terms of the amount they owe. And then they come back to step 1, they change the date or they change the number of hours they want to rent. Well, we need to recalculate those things, right? Because everything is priced hourly. So be very mindful of every step and potential ripple effects that could happen, you need to make sure that you have actions in there that keep things accurate. Okay, so in this case, our steps 1, 2, and 4 are specifically for that. It's if somebody comes back to this step, we need to modify line items, right? Step 1, if this is the first time we're going through it, line items don't exist yet. So I'm actually going to start with our third step here, and we'll come back to this so that you have better context over the line item calculations. So a brand new booking form, somebody's going through this for the first time, step 3 here is really the first action that's actually going to do anything. We're going to make a change to the rental order. We'll save the start date. We'll calculate the end date. That's the start plus the number of hours they typed in. We'll also have the duration, the number of hours in a separate field. This just gives us some flexibility. And we're going to save the current step that they're on. This kind of step tracking that we're keeping in the record is more for convenience for the user. So if they leave the page or they refresh it, we can help them pick back up where they started. That's actually happening in this pages loaded workflow here. If the page is loaded and we do see that there's a rental order, right? So there's a unique ID in the URL, it's not empty. Then we're going to set the state to whatever current step was saved to the record. Okay, and while I'm here, this is an opposite one. If the rental order is empty on the page, there's nothing really that the user can do. It's not going to save anywhere. So we're actually going to kick them out, take them back to the index page so they can start the booking process properly. Okay, so back to our step 1, we're going to make those changes to the order. I'm going to skip step 4 here. Again, I'll come back to these for keeping things updated if they're moving backwards. And then we're going to update the custom state to move to step 2 because we know we're in step 1 now. And I'm also going to scroll to the top of the page. Some of these steps, they extend, the user has to scroll down a little bit on the page. So every time they move forward, we're going to scroll them automatically up to the top, again, for convenience. So this is a element action under scroll to. We're just selecting the page itself. Technically, you can scroll to any element, but that takes us to the very top. All right, so step 2 here, and just for context, I'm going to move over to step 2 here. This is the equipment, okay? So there's quite a bit going on here because we have all these different calculations. So let's move into this folder. So first thing is that we have calculations being triggered as soon as the user modifies the quantity. And that's because these inputs are inside of a repeating group cell. I actually cannot reference input values that are inside cells from outside of the cell using my continue button. At least not natively. There are plugins that can help you kind of reach inside the cell and do kind of a bulk calculation. We don't have that in here. So what we're doing is as soon as the input quantity is changed, we'll make some changes in the database. And we have 3 different scenarios to help us with this because the quantities also got to check whether that's even available. We don't want the user to move forward if there isn't enough to rent for that time period, and if they're changing the quantity from a value of 0 to anything above 0, or if they're changing it to remove, for example, they said 2 and now they don't want any, so they clear it out. We need to make sure that we're not creating a whole bunch of duplicate records or unused records in the system. We're keeping things very, very clean as we go. So this first one here, if the inputs value is changed, and only when the parent group's line item is empty, okay, and that text where it says quantity not available isn't visible, if both of these things are true, then we know that this is the first time that they're entering in a quantity for this equipment. And more specifically, that a line item doesn't currently exist for this equipment and that there is enough for the time period. Okay, remember earlier in the video we went over the data source for that group and also this text showing or not showing based on the conflict check. Okay, so if everything is all good, we're going to create a new rental line item and we'll save the quantity, we'll save the equipment. This is referencing that group for the equipment in the cell. We'll save the order from the current page and we'll calculate the subtotal. Okay, so there's actually 2 different calculations for subtotals based on the price type of the equipment. Okay, so here we're going to default to an hourly pricing. We'll take the inputs value, this is the quantity, times the price of the equipment. Okay, so let's say it's $10. So if they say they want 2 of something that's $10 per hour, then we're going to take 2 times 10, that gives us 20, and then times the number of hours. So if they're renting for 2 hours, 20 times 2, now we have a $40 subtotal for this item. All right, so step two is in the event that the equipment's actually a flat fee pricing. So we're basically going to override that calculation where we're taking the quantity times the price and that's it. We're not multiplying by the duration. So if this was a $5 flat fee for a dry bag, for example, and they wanted three of them, we're taking a quantity of three times $5, that's $15 flat no matter how long the rental is for. Step three is going to be adding our brand new line item to the orders list of line items. This list again helps us with quick referencing in the admin page. Anytime we need to display all the line items, we can go to this list so that we don't have to do any excess searching. And then our last step here is to trigger a custom event in order to calculate the grand total for the order at this stage. The custom event is set up so that many different trigger points throughout this, all of the workflows across all of the steps, if they need to trigger a recalculation, we can do it in one flow. This is going to really help with consistency. It reduces any errors. We don't have to rebuild this workflow over and over again. So that custom event, I don't believe that's in a folder because it kind of applies to all steps here. Yep. That one's right here, and I've given the custom event this name, recalculate order total, and it's just running this one action to update the order and recalculate the total amount due to whatever the order's line items subtotal sum is. Very similar thing going on here in this version, which is the line item already exists, right? It's not empty. And we are still working with a quantity that has a value over zero. So maybe they changed it from 3 to 2 or from 1 to 4. Okay, it's still over zero, and we can see that the quantity is still available, right? Our error message isn't showing. So here we're just modifying that existing line item's quantity because that's literally what they're changing and recalculating the subtotal. So I have the same two actions here based on whatever the pricing structure is, flat fee or not. Okay, and then again, retriggering the order total with the custom event. This third version is to delete the line item if the user has set the value to zero for the quantity. Maybe they change their mind and they want to remove it completely. Okay, so if the value is zero, or if they've just completely emptied out, they backspaced in the input, or if the error message for the quantity available is visible, right? That tells us that we cannot rent this item because there's not enough. Then we're going to delete the line item that may exist there, right? We don't want it to be a part of the order because of all of these conditions here. And then of course, with removing something, we again need to recalculate the order total. And now that we have that context on how to modify all the rental line items, I'm going to take us back to step one so that we could revisit those actions that we skipped earlier, right? So this is in the event that the user is going backwards and they need to make a change to the date and time or the duration. That has a ripple effect on all the subtotals and the grand total for the order. So steps 1 and 2 are just about recalculating those subtotals for each of the price types. And then our step 4 over here is going to trigger that custom event that we looked at. Moving over to step 3, just as a reminder for what step 3 is, this is just the customer information. We've got very basic contact info here. Okay, now there's two versions here because you could have a repeat customer and it's helpful for the admin to not have duplicate customer records in the system. So let's assume this is the first time a customer is coming through. That's this scenario here. If we're in step 3, and the customer record is empty. So I actually have a data source. Let's go over to our step 3 group over here, and I'll close step 1. Okay, so step 3 has a data source set to the orders related customer. Okay, type of content is customer. And so that's why in the workflow, if we see that this group's empty, then we know that we don't have a related customer for the order. So we're going to create a new one. We'll capture all of the details, all the contact info. Notice that we're also saving the order to the customer's list of orders. And then we'll also save the relationship on the other side to the order. The customer is going to equal the result of step 1. We're also updating the state on the record, and then we're changing the custom state to navigate the user to the next screen, and then scrolling to the top of the page. Okay, this is if we need a new customer. This other version is if there's already a customer associated and maybe the user's just changing the details. Maybe they mistyped the name or the email. So we're going to modify that record and save all of those details. We don't need to do the relationships anymore because they're already there. But we do want to make sure that we update the state here, or this step value, as well as the custom state to keep them moving forward. So no matter what scenario they're in when they hit continue, we can still move forward and we have the correct customer details. Now, if again, if the user's coming in here to fill out a brand new booking, but they have been a customer before, we're handling that in the condition of this group, right? Because every booking is still going to be a unique thing. And so the rental order will initially not have a customer. So we sort of need to look up an existing customer. That's what we're doing in the condition. We're going to say if the rental orders customer is empty, then we're going to try finding an existing customer based on the email address. This way, if the customer has been in the system before and it comes up in the search, well, there you go. Now this group has a data source and it would follow this second scenario here where it's just modifying the details. As I say that, I'm realizing now that we actually do need to have the relationships here because there wouldn't have otherwise been a chance for an existing customer to be attached to the order. So we are going to add this back in. I'm glad I was thinking through that as I was talking. So we're going to say related order, add current pages order, and then over here for the order, we're going to set the customer to the result of step one, right? Those details may already be there if they're just changing their values that they've typed in, they maybe made a mistake. But this also ensures that if this conditional data source found an existing customer, that it still has an opportunity to get attached to this new order. All right, so now we're going to look at step four's workflows, which is signing all of the documents. So as a reminder, click on this button, we show a pop-up, and then we're going to do a signature here and click on this save button. And what that's doing is not just saving that image, but it's also creating a PDF with the the terms that are above it and saving it to the record. So we have several things going on. We're going to be using these two plugins here, PDF and Screenshot Pro, as well as Signature Pad. Both of these are free, okay? And let's open up our pop-up here. This is the Signature Pad element that comes with the plugin, so you can just search for it in your Visual Elements list. There's a few things that you can customize, just kind of the look of the Signature Pad, so you can look through that. And we also have the PDF element. This is basically invisible to the user, but it does need to exist on the screen here in order for the plugin to work. And for the PDF, we also need to provide an ID of the elements that we want to convert into a PDF. In our case, it's going to be this pop-up. So at the bottom of the property editor for the pop-up, I've added an ID attribute called document. This is just a word that I came up with for it. Just make sure it's something that you're remembering here because we're going to put this ID in the workflow action as well. If you don't see this ID attribute setting, go over to your editor's settings and then go to the general tab, scroll to the very bottom. It is literally the very last setting here on the screen. Expose the option to add an ID attribute. Check that box over on the right side, and then you will see it's going to expose this ID attribute field here, okay? So make sure you put an ID there. So in our workflow, we have this event here when the Signature Pad URL has been created. So you can find this once you have the plugin installed under Elements. There it is, Signature Pad. And what we want this to kick off is the generation of the PDF, okay? We don't really want to save the signature by itself. We actually just want it to go ahead and run the PDF workflow action. Okay, so Element PDF, you can find under Element Actions at the very bottom here. Element PDF, be very careful with which one you're using. There's a few different versions. This one is, we're saying we want to capture and convert a specific element in our design. So that's why we're going with this version here. And here's where I place that ID again. Okay, so the word document in my case. And then you have some dimensions that you can configure. You can customize the file name, things like that. And you do want to have save to bubble checked. What that's going to do is trigger one more workflow event over here. Okay, when the PDF has been saved and it's ready to go, we want this to trigger automatically, and that's what this checkbox will do. Okay, so what's happening inside of this workflow? Well, now we can capture and save everything in our database. So the first thing is I'm going to create the signed document record. I'm going to save the file, the PDF that was actually created. So here's this, right, this PDF elements URL. We're going to save the order to this signed document. That's just at the page level. And we're also going to save the type. So the type is actually coming from the pop-up. So let me run you through this flow real quick here. on the design, when the user clicks on view and sign, the first thing that we're doing, I'm going to go to this version of that button, is we're going to show the pop-up and send data to the pop-up so it can keep track of the type of document that we're signing, right? So we know which type is involved. Is it a waiver? Is it an agreement? Is it a medical release? That sort of thing. So our pop-up, let's open that up real quick here. This has the type of content set to document source, right? That's the file that the admin would set up. This is not a signed document. This is the source document. And so that's what we're passing in to the pop-up through this action. Basically saying, remember this selection that's coming from the repeating group out on the page, because the pop-up is very much detached from the repeating group. So this is a way to remember here, okay? And that way, when we go to create the PDF, we can now reference that source document's type to save the type to the signed document. It's just to keep everything linked so we know, we have identifiers for the signed document. Now, you see here that the view and sign button, actually, we have two different versions for it. One is to go into the pop-up to sign. The other is to actually open the document. So we're kind of making this button serve dual purpose. We do have a condition on it so that it says that it's complete, right over here, and it's all in green and everything. And this is only when the rental orders signed documents type list, right, from all of the documents, their types contains the cells document sources type. Okay, so we're using the type as this middleman communicator to match source document with signed document. All right, and so that's the same condition that we have on both of these actions here. If the list of types doesn't contain the cells document type, then we know that we haven't signed it before, so we're going to show the pop-up. If it does contain that type, then we know we have signed it, and so we can open in an external website, right, just in the browser, the actual file. We'll go to the rental orders signed document list, we'll filter it down by the type so we can find the right one, and then go directly to that file's URL. I know that one's a little bit of a maze there because of the connections. Another way you can do the data structure here in the data types is to have a relationship between the signed document and the document source. That works too. You wouldn't necessarily have to go through the type that way, but it really just depends on your design. I'll often, which is going to be the most efficient data source that you want to use in your expressions. But there's a few ways to go about it. Okay. All right, so back to the PDF generation, we have captured the type. Now we can make a change to the order, add this new signed document to the orders list. And in step 3, we actually need to delete an extra file that's created throughout this whole process that we're not using. The signature pad actually generates a standalone image of the signature. Now, if you do want to capture that and save that somewhere, then you can use that. But in our example, we don't want that because we're going to see it in the signed document overall in that PDF. So we're going to delete that file. This is referencing the signature pad element, and you can go to the PNG URL. Remember, if you don't have files that you're going to be working with, right, that have been uploaded to your file manager, you're just taking up space that you're actually paying for. Your plan comes with a limited amount of file capacity. You can add more, kind of as an add-on to your plan, but, be efficient with it so that you're only paying for what you use. And then we're going to go through some reset functions here. Remember, we're still inside the pop-up right now, so we're going to clear the signature pad, we're going to clear the PDF element, and then we'll hide the pop-up, and that takes the user back to the main screen for step 3. All right. And then clicking on, I'm sorry, we're on step 4 here. And then clicking on the continue button, if we're on step 4, we're just going to update the order to say, okay, we're now moving into step 5 as well as our custom state. Okay. Step 5 is our payment step. Let's go over here so you have some context, right? They visually are just going to see a quick summary. They'll see all the calculations. I haven't been selecting anything as I've moved here, but when they do have an amount that is over $100, that's our logic, we're going to see that continue to deposit payment button show up in the middle there. And that is this workflow right here that's going to trigger a Stripe action. So we have an integration with Stripe using Bubble's Stripe plugin. There are many ways to do payment integrations. You can also use the API connector to do your own connection if you want, or if you're connecting to a different payment gateway, you can look for to see if there's a plugin for it, or you can use the API connector, do your own custom thing. But we're using Bubbles built in. There's a lot of standard functions here, and we've got our keys in place for development. We're using the version 3 checkout to go to that really nicely designed checkout page that Stripe has for us. Okay, it's pretty much built in. So we're going to run this charge action, which we can find under payment, charge the user. We'll send over all of these details here about the booking. We've got the customer's email. You'll actually see that show up in the checkout page. The amount, remember in this for this charge, we're just doing the deposit. So we're referencing that expression that we have in the design. And then we've got some details for the statement. We've got a logo that we can display there, things like that. And then we're going to change the custom state to move to step 6, which is just our final confirmation screen. Internally, we'll be creating a transaction record. So the transaction type here is our deposit. We'll save all the relevant details. The amount, again, coming from the expression. The customer is from the orders, related customer. The ID is the result of our charge step. This is all information we can get out of Stripe, right, as a result of doing that charge. So we're going to save that charge ID. And also the type, we know that it's deposit, so we'll kind of hard code that in. That's coming from our option set list. And of course the order. Then we'll modify the order to now change the status to active. Before it was in draft up until this point. We'll add the new transaction to the list, change the step to 6, and we're going to copy in that active status's calendar color. That was that hex code. This is the custom attribute in the option set. So the calendar can actually display the events with dynamic colors there. And then this is a good opportunity to send confirmation emails. And we're going to wrap up here by looking at the workflows on our admin page. We'll start with the navigation function. So anytime the user wants to switch between any of these views from the top menu, or if they click on an event here and go to the detail page, or even within any one of the tables, we do have these shortcuts to view a specific rental order. We're just changing a custom state, and then we're updating the data source of that details group. So I have a whole folder specifically for the navigation because we have lots of different trigger points here. So for example, our menu items up at the top, dashboard, when that's clicked, we're going to set the state to the word dashboard. When equipment is clicked, we'll set the state to equipment, and so on. If I go to the calendar, I'm setting the state to the word details. Remember, all of those primary groups have a condition to make them visible based on this value. And if we are going to the details group, we're going to update the data source. So for the calendars scenario here, we're going to go to the calendar's current event. If we're clicking on one of those view buttons from the tables, we're going to go to the rows, related record, and then the related order for that record. That one's from the transaction table. Over here, we have the one from the rental order table directly. So it's just the rows thing there. Okay, so that's really all there is for the navigation. It's just updating those custom states. Now we'll take a look at all of these rental operations. Many of them we've already seen from the booking flow, primarily making changes to the line items, the quantities, right, the selected equipment, and also we have the added thing here of doing credits for the customer. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to run through these workflow events just in the order that we're seeing them here. The first one is add item. Where we've given the admin the ability to manually add a new line item to the order by clicking on this button. It adds a new line to our repeating group, and that way they can custom, select the quantity, select the equipment. It'll calculate everything. It'll, have a ripple effect on the grand totals too. So add item will first create a new record. It'll relate that line item record to the order. This is the group details order. It'll update the order and add the new line item to the order's list of line items. And this list, remember, is the data source of the repeating group here. So as soon as that item is added to the list, we immediately see it in our design. I don't have to refresh the page or anything. And because at this point, there's no quantity or equipment selected, we don't need to recalculate anything quite yet. If I start making changes to the quantity or make any selections to the equipment, we have those workflows here. So here's the quantity. We're going to see those same 2 version actions to modify the subtotal based on the fee type, whether it's flat fee or not. Right, we'll save the quantity, and then we'll trigger a custom event that we have on this page, again, really similar to what we did on the booking page, to update the grand total of the order. So this is modifying the record, and it's just going to all of the line items, subtotals, sum. Okay, so that's from the quantity, very similar here with the equipment. We'll save the selected equipment, recalculate the subtotal because the equipment has its own price. Same process, right? Depending on the fee type and then updating the total order. The user does have the ability to remove line items. We basically reverse out of everything. So you click on remove, we're going to delete that related line item and then trigger the update order because now we've decreased the price by whatever the line item cost. All right, we also have a cancel workflow, which is a button that we have at the bottom of the screen here in the lower left. And this is not deleting the record, it's actually just changing the status. So here, status is canceled. The color for canceled is going to be different, so we're copying that from the option set as well. That way it still shows up in the calendar. And this is just a choice, right, for the business. We want to be able to see things that were previously confirmed but are now canceled because that's an important insight to get. If there's too many cancellations, and that probably means we need to change something. We're scrolling to the top of the page. Once that's done, showing an alert message to let them know that the status change went through. Okay. Here we have a charge balance workflow, which is this blue button that we see here. We're giving the admin the ability to run a final payment on whatever the balance due is. Now, there's a lot of different ways that you can do this because depending on how the business works, they may take cash, they may want to present the user with another checkout screen right there at the desk, or they may want to charge a credit card on file, they may want to do a partial payment. In that case, you would want to have another input for them to type in the amount. But we're going to simulate, an example scenario here, which is just to charge the full remaining balance. So we're creating a transaction here. When this is clicked, we'll calculate that amount. So it's the order total minus all of the payments that have already been submitted to the order. So we're going to the transactions, making sure that we're not including any refunds, and adding up, doing a sum on all of those amounts. This is not a credit. This is not a refund. I don't have an ID to put in because I don't have an integration action. And we're going to tie this transaction to the customer. This is a payment, and we're going to tie it to the order. We'll also update the order to add the new transaction to the order's list of transactions. That way it shows up in this repeating group down here. Okay. Our next workflow here is marking complete. So that's another status change, is that button that we had on the right. This particular one's already complete. So this one's making a change to the order, updating the status, also capturing that color, scrolling to the top of the page and showing an alert message. Very straightforward there. The open button is to display the document. So we have that here. Here's an example of one. So if I click on this, it'll open up in a separate tab. I see that agreement that was signed. So this is just opening up the file that already exists in an external website, and we do have opening it in a separate tab there. Now for refunds, we have two different workflows here. One is to actually process a refund, and then the other is if we're looking at a credit and we want to remove the credit. This is a button that's actually serving dual purpose. We change the label on it. We can definitely do this across two different buttons if we wanted. We've just consolidated it here. So this scenario here is for if it is for a refund, if the transaction type is payment or deposit. Those are our two types that we can process a refund on. So we'll run a Stripe action. This is under payments, and then you have create a refund here. This is coming from the plugin to actually have Stripe process a refund. So here, all we need to provide is the ID of the transaction we're refunding. That's why it's really important to save those IDs to your records. Then we're also going to create an internal record for our own documentation purposes that a refund was processed. So here we want to show the amount as a negative since it's a refund, it's not a payment. So we'll do the transactions amount times -1. We'll capture the customer, then we'll capture the refund ID, which is its own ID. It's not the same as the charge ID. Okay, this is coming from the Stripe action. The type is refund, and then we'll also relate it to the order. And we're going to modify the original transaction that we're refunding and mark this yes or no field to yes. Okay, that allows us to do this kind of thing in the design to show that, okay, this payment did go through on this date and time, this was the charge, but it has since been refunded. All right. Next action here is adding that new refund transaction to the order. The other version of this button, again, is if the transaction type is actually a credit on the order, then clicking on this is going to remove that credit. Okay, so I'm actually going to show you. I don't think I've gone through this flow here yet. So let's say that we've given the customer in general a credit of $200. Okay, so this is getting added just as a relationship to the customer, not to the order. So they have $200 available to use on any order. Now that there is a credit of over $0, we have this button appear. There's a condition on it waiting to see any credit amount amount. And this button is just going to apply the full credit to the order. You can, of course, add an input so that maybe you apply partial credit. That's up to how granular you want this to be. But I'm going to click on this now. Okay, and so that actually created a new transaction specifically for crediting the order with that amount that was available there. And so now you see this button says remove. We actually had one down there before. Remove is the other workflow that we're looking at right now. Okay, so I'm going to click on this here, click on remove, and you see that that credit actually went away. That line item for the transaction disappeared, and you see that the customer now has that credit back. In their, on their customer profile. So I'll walk you through the credit workflows here real quick first. When I'm adding a credit to the customer, I'm creating a transaction for that amount that was typed in, right? This is at the top here. Tying it to the customer, this is a customer credit. And we'll say that it's not used, right? Because it's brand new credit. We'll also modify the customer and add this specific transaction to the customer's list. This is sort of how we're creating a credit on the profile of the customer, right? Regardless of what orders they have. Okay, and then we'll reset the inputs. Then if I'm going to apply the credit to a specific order, so that was this button down here, we're going to modify all of the transactions that contributed to the current credit, right? Because I'm going to have this button just apply the full credit amount. The user may have been credited multiple times. So we want to make sure that we modify all of the customer's credits that have not yet been used. And we're going to say, okay, we're now using all of them, right? And so all of these fields will change to yes. Then we'll create a new standalone transaction to say that we are crediting the order with that total credit amount, right, from the result of step one's amount sum, and then tying it to the customer and the order, of course, and also modifying the order to add this new transaction to that list. Okay, so back to our remove button, we basically reverse. We're going to create a transaction to, again, recredit the customer and say that the credit has not been used for whatever the amount was. And then we'll also add that new transaction to the customer's list and then delete the order credit because we don't need it anymore. It's not being applied. There's really no need to document it. So we're just going to remove it from the system. But we are keeping track of the credits for the customer. Okay, and then finally, our last workflow here is our Save Changes button. This is the button that we have at the upper right corner. This is going to save anything that's not inside of a repeating group. So we're going to make changes to the order. If the admin decided to modify the date, the duration, any of that information, it will save those details, and it's going to recalculate everything because, again, the date and the duration has an effect on the total. Because things are priced per hour. So we'll identify those line items based on them not being a flat fee. Those are the only ones that are affected by this change. So we recalculate the subtotal, we'll trigger our custom event to update the final total, show our alert message, and scroll the user to the top of the page. All right, I hope this walkthrough for building a rentals app on Bubble was helpful. And if it was, the content you're about to see on the next screen will help you take things even further.